Okay, thank you everyone for joining Ricoh IT Services webinar. This is servers to refresh or not to refresh. That is the question. However, if you are still running an old operating system, by the end of this session, we think you'll see clearly why, if you are running Windows 2003 or Windows 2008, that it is certainly time to look at refreshing your server environment. My name is Deborah Diel, and I'm the Product and Marketing Manager for Ricoh's IT Infrastructure Services. Unfortunately, our scheduled speaker, Grant Burrows, was unable to join us today. So instead, we have one of our senior systems engineers, Jesse Loudon, here, and he's going to be your presenter today. Jesse is part of the professional services team, providing engineering solutions and consulting with a lot of expertise in Windows Server operating systems, as well as VMware and Citrix. Jesse will take over shortly, but firstly, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to Ricoh IT Services and take care a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, if you have any questions at any time during the webinar, you can enter those into the questions pane and hit send. If the question's coming up with something that we're going to cover or there's an appropriate time to answer it throughout the presentation, we will. Otherwise, we'll save all questions and we'll come back to those at the end of the session. For those who aren't familiar with Ricoh IT Services, we're the IT Services division of Ricoh Australia and part of a $22 billion company that provides business technology solutions to customers from very small businesses through to large organizations around the world. Here in Australia, we've been providing IT services since 1994, and that includes our portfolio of cloud, network, professional, managed IT, collaboration, and procurement services. We work with many small and mid-sized business IT departments to help with their strategic priorities as well as day-to-day operational support for their IT, or we can act as a fully outsourced provider in some cases. As some of you may be aware, last month we conducted a short poll around the state of server technology in Australia. Thank you to all of those who may have participated. We have collected the results, and I just wanted to share some of our key findings with you today. Of the survey respondents, 44% revealed they've recently invested in a completely new server to meet the needs of their organization, or as far as performance goes, 19% were very unsatisfied or unsatisfied with their server performance. This indicates that many businesses have already recognized the need to keep their servers up to date and have made steps to refresh their technology. But for some, there may still be quite a little bit of work to do. 60% of respondents diligently apply server updates, and 31% consider these updates critical. Based on this and the amount of old server technology that's purported to still be in use in the market, it's no surprise that 24% of respondents were worried or very worried that support for Windows Server 2003 is about to come to an end. The biggest concerns Australian IT managers stated about deploying new servers are the risk of disrupting their business or losing important business applications and finding the time to make the upgrade. Over half also feel that they're under significant pressure to cut IT costs in their business. Through careful planning, businesses can mitigate the risk of downtime when they upgrade their servers and also reduce the time it takes for migration. Servers that are out of date have more potential to disrupt your business, and there can be a lot of hidden costs involved with running older technology in your environment, such as power inefficiencies, the cost of fixing unsupported systems, and potential costs to your business of security breaches and downtime. So that is the results, the high-level results of the server poll. More results will be available shortly. I'll now pass over to Jesse, who will expand on what businesses need to expect with Windows 2003 end of life and how to ensure your servers are ready to meet your current and future business needs.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning to everyone joining us today to discuss the overall question of to refresh or not to refresh. I'd also like to apologize in advance if there are moments of technical overload during this webinar. I'll try my best to keep things as simple as possible for you without the technical terms and jargon. But if there's anything you need to clarify with us, please don't hesitate to enter it into the chat box. Thank you. So just quickly, to put this discussion into perspective, Microsoft actually ended mainstream support for Windows Server 2003 back in July 2010. And in about 7 days, extended support will also cease for that operating system. So let's address the question. What does end of life really mean for Windows Server 2003? It means end of updates. So no more bug fixes and security patches for that operating system. And I will also translate this into meaning end of life and the end of free support from Microsoft for Windows Server 2003. End of life also means your business could be at risk of failing to meet the requirements of future compliance audits. This point is particularly relevant for businesses that handle credit card data and are storing or passing that sensitive data through their server infrastructure. So what this all translates to is that end of life can also mean no safe haven for your applications, your workloads, your services, and your data that might be living on the Windows Server 2003 operating system. Speaking from my own experience as an engineer, the majority of businesses which are still using Windows Server 2003 are often doing so because of an installed application which has a dependency on that particular operating system due to compatibility issues with newer operating systems or the complexity which exists behind the application's existing configuration. So it's certainly not uncommon to be in a situation where you need to first address the applications that are installed to your Windows Server 2003 servers even before you consider how to deal with the server operating system. So let's address the question of why upgrade. Some of you may already be aware that upgrading is a very time-tasking process. You may already be in the planning phase or transition phase away from Windows Server 2003. Others may have just begun to take an in-depth look into what you have in your environment during the discovery phase. So let's go quickly over the reasons for upgrading. What are the main reasons? What are the benefits that come with upgrading from Windows Server 2003 to a newer operating system such as Windows Server 2012 R2? The first reason for upgrading is that if you can, you want to avoid the increased risk due to lower security because of Windows Server 2003 in your environment, which will no longer receive security patches from Microsoft in about 7 days' time. The second reason for upgrading are the increased costs that are associated with maintaining an operating system such as Windows Server 2003, which may be installed and running on older server or storage hardware in your environment. So for example, if you're unlucky enough to encounter hardware failure and that hardware is out of warranty, replacement parts will be expensive and may not be readily available due to reduced supply and demand from the hardware manufacturer. So that means increased downtime for your business and users who are ideally just out of the game and they won't be happy. And finally, another reason to upgrade is to reduce the complexity that you might have in your existing environment and to standardize where it makes sense to do so. So for example, some businesses have applications and workloads deployed across 3 to 4 different Windows Server operating systems, increasing the complexity of their environment. And this means more time and effort is spent by their IT performing regular day-to-day operations and change requests. This inefficiency can be addressed by consolidating down to perhaps 1 or 2 versions of later Windows Server operating systems. And again, only do it if it makes sense to do so financially and if it fits in line with your business goals. So what are the benefits from upgrading? We've listed 5 of the main benefits here. Let's just go through them quickly. Security. Vulnerabilities are fixed through patches and you have the latest security features. Efficiencies and cost savings. You can consolidate through virtualization for less power, cooling, and rack space. Flexibility. If you virtualize your workload, you have the ability to make changes without shutting down the virtual machine and shutting down the physical server underneath. You can hot add CPU and RAM resources through a virtualized environment. You also get the great performance benefits, better processing speeds, increased memory, solid-state drives. And it's important to note as well, Windows Server 2003 is a 32-bit operating system, and that's capped at 4 gigabytes of memory. So even moving to Windows Server 2008, not even going to Windows Server 2012, you're moving to a 64-bit operating system which has much higher memory capacity and much higher capacity to be able to perform under stress of today's technology. Finally, the ability to leverage the latest technology. So we're talking about Windows Server 2003 being an operating system that is over 10 years old. Actually moving your workload, your applications to a new operating system means that you take advantage of 10 years of improvements in innovation and technology that have occurred since Windows Server 2003 was first released. So that's an important part to discuss. So think ahead. Can your present environment take your business into the future? This statement really gets me thinking about the questions around what are your business needs? How do you see your business progressing and growing in the next 2 to 3 years, perhaps 5 years? Because of course you can't think too far ahead. Technology moves too quickly, but at least perhaps you have a roadmap, a technical roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years. And what are your goals out of that? What do you need to do to reduce costs and increase your flexibility and your business agility in your to fit in line with your business model? Have you also considered moving your workloads to the cloud to take advantage of today's innovation and modernization that exists? One instance of that is Office 365, of course. That's certainly a good case to look at if you haven't already considered it. So when talking about considerations for upgrading, it usually comes down to what is actually running on your Windows Server 2003 servers. What do you have there? Do you have applications? Is it just simply a file and print server? Is it more complex? Do you have a cluster of servers? So what do you have? Have you done the discovery phase of the process of migrating? And when we're talking about applications, some questions that I often come across are, can you migrate your existing applications, or do they need to be upgraded? So if you have an application, perhaps it's not supported on newer operating systems, you cannot migrate that. You need to actually upgrade that to a newer version of the application that's offered by the vendor. And that's certainly something that you'll think about during the assessment phase of this process. Another good question is, do you have legacy applications that your business needs to retain for historical data? Legacy applications often don't run in newer operating systems, so you often have to keep an operating system such as Windows Server 2003 in your environment. But you can actually, you can virtualize that, you can back it up, you can keep it, I guess, packaged up. It doesn't really need to be production, I guess, but it still needs to be available. So that's something to think about. And also for applications, do you need to keep the application in-house or on-premise? Or would you benefit from having it deployed to the cloud? So for example, if you're currently using Microsoft Exchange on-premise, such as Exchange 2007, Exchange 2010, in your environment, you might consider moving to a cloud offering such as Office 365 to take advantage of built-in scalability, the 99% uptime, performance improvements, and also all the other great things, including actually there's a Office 365 has a standard 50 gigabyte mailbox for each user. So that's a big talking point for businesses that are experiencing an increasing reliance on email storage from their users. I think 5 years ago, I would have seen a number of users reaching the 10 gigabyte mark. These days, it's quite easy to find someone who's already reached 40 gigabyte mailbox sizes because of the increase in files that and attachments that they send. So that's a big thing to consider. We also need to consider the hardware. If your organization is concerned with its carbon footprint, you can choose to consolidate the amount of physical hardware in your environment into densely optimized pooled resources, and at the same time take advantage of virtualization, which really enables you to utilize the underlying physical components more efficiently. So what that means is you might have a number of servers deployed on site, and those servers were deployed 10 years ago. Perhaps they're not virtualized servers. Perhaps they're not using virtualization technology such as Hyper-V or VMware. So you could look at, can you benefit from virtualizing those servers? Can you run more virtual machines? Can you run virtual machines on those physical components, take advantage of it, really take advantage of Hyper-V, VMware? It depends on if you have agreements with them and where your business goals are as well. More importantly, is your existing hardware still covered by warranty? And can you afford the risk of running hardware that's out of warranty? If you're looking to acquire new hardware, perhaps it's time to review your vendor agreements and look into making more cost savings on new hardware and take advantage of discounts that might be available. So depending on your existing environment and what your business goals are, it might be worth looking into and considering the following infrastructure models. Do you need to host everything on-premise, or do you have, do you need to have complete control over the system? You might have an on-premise deployment model where everything is hosted on-site, and you can actually, if you can guarantee the physical security of it, that might be the best option for your business. Other deployment models include private cloud, which is a tried and tested dedicated hosted service through a provider such as Ricoh. Public cloud is really attractive for the low cost, high availability advantages, and of course the agile service it provides. But that's at the disadvantage of not having as much control over where your data is stored and hosted from. So that's certainly something to think about. And finally, would you benefit from using a hybrid cloud infrastructure, taking advantage of both features associated with on-premise and cloud infrastructure? Perhaps this could be your chosen deployment model if you wanted to make a gradual transition to a full cloud setup. So perhaps you didn't want to go from on-premise to public cloud or private cloud straight away. You just wanted to have a transition period, so you might have half your resources in the cloud and the other half on-prem. So how can we proceed from here? We're listing the 5 steps for success here. First of all, we have the discovery phase here. During the discovery phase, this is really something that your IT will do, and they will actually run an audit of your applications and workloads that are running on your Windows servers. And during that phase, they're just taking as much information as they can, finding out what's there, what's actually being used. Perhaps you might have had an idea of what was being used 5 years ago, but since that time, there's been a lot of changes, and you might actually find that there might be some servers kicking around which are not as heavily utilized as they previously were. So this is an important phase to actually find out what you have, and the next phase assesses where you categorize what you have into certain important features. So during this phase, you would take an in-depth look of what you have, applications, workloads, services, and categorize them by type, importance, and complexity. And at this phase, the IT managers will usually be called upon to provide guidance on the importance of each finding, such as whether an application which is not heavily used still needs to be kept available during the migration with 100% of the time. Or perhaps the application is no longer needed by the business and can be decommissioned completely. Just a quick note, the assess phase actually really just sets the tone for later phases in the project. It's one of those important steps that you need to do. It's part of the, I guess, one of those important phases where you need close collaboration between the IT managers and the IT people to actually decide on what the path forward is. And then you should look at targeting an appropriate migration path for your workloads, whether it be upgrading to Windows Server 2012 R2 on-premise or moving to the cloud, delivering your applications through the cloud, utilizing a cloud offering such as Office 365, or hosting the services in your own private data center. Now, of course, depending on your requirements, you may opt to use different migration paths for different applications and workloads. So after you've completed all the planning phases, you're now ready to migrate to your new environment. This is where you've done the design, you've done the planning, you know how important your workloads are, you know what you need to do, whether you have a small setup or a big environment. This is really the migration phase is really the business end of this whole process. And just personally, a couple of things are often missed. You need to actually, from an engineer's perspective, plan for the worst and hope for the best. So that means you need to ensure you have backups in place, you have a rollback plan, and you're doing testing along the way. You're not just cutting over services and then hoping for the best. You're actually doing a phased migration. So you're making sure you can, if you can test the cutover before you do a final cutover, that would be great, and that means your business is protected. So the migration plan will include how is it going to happen, when is it going to happen, who's going to do it, and the order of migration based on the highest priority to the lowest priority. Normally you would do the highest priority applications and services last. You would leave the more complex workloads to the final stage of the migration. And the reason you want to do that is because if there's any issues with your migration plan, you want to test them first on the applications and workflows which are not as important to the business. So if something goes offline, you do have that buffer of built in. Okay, and I'll just hand over to Bree to complete the final stages of this webinar.
Okay, so thank you everyone. If you are still running old server equipment, especially Windows 2003, that is only 1 week away from end of life. The time to start planning your migration is really now. If you need some support to upgrade, Ricoh IT Services can help evaluate the most suitable infrastructure model for your business, design and implement a new solution, and assist with a full project or step in where you may need some extra support. We also have flexible in-house financing options for procurement and professional services. So if you're concerned about upfront costs of migrating now, then that is something that we can help support through financing, so that instead you can pay a low monthly fee. Along with our vendor partners Cisco, Nimble, and HP, we've put together some hardware bundles to make it easier for you to look at your upgrades, and we'll send these out to you after the webinar. We have left lots of time here for questions. Considering that you probably have a lot of questions about what this means to you and what you need to think about when migrating your environment. So I will open up the floor now to any questions, and please just enter those into that chat box. Okay, so Adam's just asked a question here. Would it make sense to wait on Windows Server 2016 before migrating from 2003 or an older version? I'll pass this back over to Jesse to answer. Really good question. Thanks for that, Adam.
Yep, so the question of would it make sense to wait for Windows Server 2016, I think that's called Windows Server vNext, possibly. So the question actually means is, can you afford to wait a year for this new server to be released? And typically, I would advise against it, because a new server being released generally means you need to provide training to your IT. There possibly is some bugs, and the learning curve would be higher as well. So I would actually seriously consider using Windows Server 2012 R2, which has been in the market for a number of years now. Secondly, you're talking about a 13 to 14 year gap in technologies. So making the jump for Windows Server 2003 to the very latest operating system doesn't really make sense. I would much prefer to go to an operating system that has been in production for a number of years, such as Windows Server 2012 R2.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. We've had another question just come through from Sylvia. When does extended support end for Microsoft Server 2008? Do you know the response to that, Jesse?
When does extended support end for Server 2008? That's a good question. So if you're considering moving to Server 2008, you're not sure about 2012 R2 as an operating system, Microsoft actually, they say they're going to end extended support for 2008 in 2020, January 15, 2020. They're actually currently on mainstream support now. 2008 R2 is it could be a jump box for your applications and your workloads, but I see that I really see moving to 2008 R2 as an unnecessary change. I would prefer to go to Server 2008 R2 for the features and the benefits that operating system provides. I think some businesses may only move to 2008 R2 if they have applications which have code that are tied to specifically the 2008 R2 or 2008 operating system. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we've had a question from Luke. How long and how much ballpark does it cost to migrate an on-premise Exchange under 500 users to Office 365?
Yep, great question, Luke. So ballpark estimation on the cost to migrate under 5 users from on-premise Exchange to Office 365. So it really depends on whether you're willing to do a complete, I guess, overnight cutover of those users, or whether you're more inclined to have a staged migration of those users to the cloud. Would you be more? Would it be a better business case to slowly transition those users to the cloud? That way, if something goes wrong or if there's any issues that need to be resolved, then you can have the time to actually resolve them. Okay, so I've seen you've said you want to go for a staged, gradual migration. From my own experience, I actually recently completed a 300+ user migration from on-prem Exchange 2010 to Office 365. So that actually did take a couple months, and we're talking about having the migration planned. So I guess the first thing you would do is categorize your users into certain categories. Who are the most important users? Do they need to be migrated first? And are you more willing to migrate the smaller mailboxes first? I think the way I would do it is I would look at what mailbox sizes you have for each across the whole organization. Try and migrate the smaller mailboxes first, or perhaps do a couple of large mailboxes and then the smaller ones, so you can stage it. Generally, I find if I've migrated the smaller mailboxes first, it then increases the amount of time that I have later to do the bigger mailboxes. So you might find doing a large mailbox might take, actually, depending on your network speed, it could take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to migrate that entire mailbox to the cloud. And during that time, the user probably won't be able to access their mailbox. So that's certainly something to consider.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. And Luke, it's definitely, looking at pricing for these things it's always a hard one because there's so many variables. So it's definitely something that we can get in touch with you afterwards to find more specifically what your needs are and to look at, a solution that may suit. One more question just came in from John, and he was asking as a follow-up, how long does a typical migration from Windows 2003 take? Well, John, I guess again it's going to depend on what exactly you're looking at in your environment. Jesse may have some more thoughts based on some of the work that he's done as well, though.
Yep. So how long does a typical migration take? So if we look at a use case, a case that I had recently, I did a migration for 10 servers for one of our clients here at Ricoh. They had 5 on-premise 2003 servers. They were domain controllers, file and print servers, and they had 5 servers deployed into the private data center as virtual machines. So transitioning that operating system to newer versions, we actually deployed Windows Server 2012 on-prem to replace those on-prem servers, and we also deployed newer servers in the private data center as well. And that whole process took about a month, but it was really dependent on the complexity of the applications that were running on the service. So if you're talking about just upgrading or migrating away from a simple file and print domain controller, that process, you could do that overnight. that's really something which is not complex at all. The migration and upgrade steps to do that are quite simple. So it's not really dependent on any third-party applications that you might have. And even if you did have third-party applications, you could leverage some tools such as AppZero. And I generally find that's really why the discovery phase is so important, so that you can actually find out what you have in your environment, and then you can categorize that by importance. And do you really need to keep this application that's been kicking around for 10 years? Do you really need to have all these files, or do you really need 2 terabytes of data stored on this file server in a remote location, or can that be archived somewhere? You know, it's part of the whole process, I guess.
Lovely. I hope that answers your question, John. And just one more in here from Joe, who's asking, what are some of the common problems to anticipate when planning a migration from Windows 2003 to a later version? Any experience about that, Jesse, from some of the projects that you've worked on?
Okay, so common problems to anticipate. I would say especially problems that I've run into are custom applications that no one knows how they were set up, just because perhaps they were implemented 5 years ago from an IT provider. There was no documentation on it. You have no idea how it works, but you need to transition that application into a newer operating system, and just luck has it that the application is used so frequently it's considered production. So if that went offline, then you're going to get bombarded with calls. So that's a common problem, I think. So having a dependency on an operating system and you know nothing about it. So the way I would approach that is, I guess, as you might say, you might do a little bit of reverse engineering. So I would try and, if it's a Windows server and it's an application on the Windows server, I would try and get access to the application through a test user account. I would try and look at the configuration of it. Does it have a database? Are there any configuration files I can look at? And also try and contact the support vendor to find out if there's any instructions on migrating to a newer operating system. I think things to consider, of course, are whether you have backups of it. Backups are very important, of course. If you turn off that application or migrate it away and you make changes so that the users are not able to use it on the previous operating system, and it doesn't work in the new system, you need a backup to be able to restore to and ensure things are up and running again.
Okay, any final questions from anybody in the audience? Doesn't look like we have any more questions coming through. So if that's all, we're running a bit early here, but that's okay. Everyone gets a bit of time back in their day, which I'm sure no one is going to complain about. Thank you all very much for your time today. I really do hope that you found this session valuable. And if you'd like any further information, either what Ricoh provides or advice and support around Windows Server 2003 or migrating off an older server environment, that you can visit our website, itservices.ricoh.com.au, or you can call us on 13-RICOH. And again, thank you very much and have a good day.